Grace's swollen belly shook the entire hospital floor. It was so huge, 25 times bigger than a normal pregnancy, that even the most experienced doctors whispered in disbelief. Under the harsh glare of flickering emergency lights, the operating room felt more like a war zone than a place of life. Nurses hesitated, some even backing away, murmuring superstitions under their breath. The power had just gone out. The backup generator had run dry. And Grace was losing blood fast. Outside, rain slammed against cracked windows. Somewhere down the hall, a stretcher screeched. Jacob's stretcher. Moments earlier, full of joy that he would finally be a father, he'd signed the consent papers for her surgery, rushed out to fetch supplies, and ended up in a car crash that flung him through broken glass. Now he was being wheeled in, his face pale, whispering her name. The last scan had shown only one baby. But as the lead surgeon cut through what they believed were fibroids but found great imaginations, gasps followed. This wasn't just a single child. The nurses stood frozen. Grace's heartbeat faltered. Jacob, in another ward, heard distant cries just as his vision blurred. He tried to sit up, ignoring his broken ribs, and whispered, "Grace, our babies." But would she survive to hear their first cries? If this moment already has you holding your breath, please subscribe and like. This story will change how you see love, sacrifice, and motherhood forever. 15 years earlier, Grace was the girl everyone envied. She was beautiful, kind, and chaste, every parent's dream daughter. She had spent her youth guarding her purity, believing that when love came, it would be perfect. And when she met Jacob, it felt like destiny had rewarded her. Jacob was tall, handsome, and gentle. His laughter could melt anger, and his touch spoke promises of forever. They married in a small but joyous ceremony under a sky streaked with orange sunset. Friends whispered, "They're the perfect couple." For the first few years, their home was filled with laughter, whispered dreams, and stolen kisses in the kitchen. But as time crawled on, something was missing, a child. At first, they laughed about it, telling themselves it would happen soon. But the months turned into years. Neighbors began to murmur. Mothers in the market shot Grace pitying glances. At family gatherings, old women jokingly asked, "So, when will we hear little feet running around your house?" Jacob stayed strong, holding her close each night. "Grace," he whispered, "our time will come. Don't let them shake you." They prayed in churches, fasted in mosques, visited herbalists, and spent their savings on medical tests. Each time, they returned home empty-handed but still clinging to hope. Then came the whispers, soft at first, then sharper. Maybe Grace isn't a real woman. Maybe Jacob should look elsewhere. The pressure grew heavier with every passing season. One rainy evening, after another failed IVF attempt, Grace sat on the floor of their bedroom, clutching the negative result. Her tears soaked the paper. Jacob knelt beside her, his own eyes glassy, and said, "We'll keep trying, my love. I will never leave you." She believed him. But family pressure is a cruel weight. Jacob's mother visited, her voice gentle but cutting. "Jacob, the family name must live on." Even his colleagues began dropping hints. Grace noticed Jacob's laughter had changed. Less frequent, more forced. He came home late, smelling of someone else's perfume. And then the blow. A rumor reached her ears. Jacob had gotten a coworker pregnant. Grace confronted him, trembling. "Tell me it's a lie, Jacob. Tell me you didn't." He couldn't meet her eyes. I'm sorry, Grace. I was weak. I was tired of the whispers. But I still love you. Please don't leave me." Her heart shattered. Chaos erupted in their home. Shouting, broken plates, tears that burned. But even through the storm, love, wounded but alive, pulled them back together. Grace chose forgiveness. She chose to believe that their story wasn't over. For the next few years, they lived in a fragile peace. Jacob provided for the child he fathered elsewhere, but at home he clung to Grace. Together they built their lives on fragile hope. Then came the 15th year. Grace began feeling ill, strange fatigue, nausea, and an uncomfortable swelling in her belly. First she dismissed it. But the swelling grew monstrous. By the time she reached the hospital, whispers followed her. Some doctors suspected pregnancy. Others muttered about fibroids or worse. And as her belly grew, far beyond anything they'd ever seen, nurses avoided her bed, women called her cursed, and even strangers mocked her. Grace bore it silently, remembering the vow she'd made to herself, to endure, to hope. Yet deep inside, a small voice whispered, "What if this is the miracle we prayed for?" The tests gave conflicting answers. The doctors prepared her for the worst. And on that fateful day, Jacob's joy turned to horror as both their lives balanced on a knife's edge. Grace in the operating room, Jacob bleeding in another ward. The hospital corridors buzzed with tension as midnight crept in. Outside, thunder grumbled like an angry god, but inside, it was the sound of frantic footsteps and muffled cries that rattled everyone's nerves. Grace's screams echoed faintly from behind the operating room door, each one a dagger in Jacob's chest as he lay bandaged in another ward, too weak to move but too restless to stay still. A young nurse named Mary sprinted between rooms, clutching 2 bags, her face pale. The power flickered again. The hospital generator still hadn't been refueled. Sweat rolled down the surgeon's face as he barked orders. "Hold the flashlight steady. We can't lose her." In the maternity ward, whispers grew louder. They said it was only one baby. But did you hear those cries? No woman survives something like that. The women who had mocked Grace earlier now bit their lips in guilt, remembering their harsh words. Meanwhile, Jacob forced himself upright, pain stabbing his ribs. "I need to see my wife," he whispered hoarsely. The nurse attending him gently pushed him back. "Please, sir, you'll tear your stitches. Stay down. We'll update you." But Jacob's mind was a storm. Memories flooded in. Grace's laughter on their wedding night, her soft humming while folding his shirts, the way she forgave him when he didn't deserve it. He gripped the bedsheet with trembling hands. She can't die. Not after everything. In the operating room, Grace's consciousness slipped like water through fingers. She could barely feel the scalpel or the tug of the surgeon's hands. Her mind drifted, to the nights of silent prayers, to the moment she'd cried alone in the bathroom so Jacob wouldn't see, to the faces of people who'd mocked her. She whispered a single word. "Jacob! Stay with us, Grace," the surgeon shouted, his voice cracking. "We're not losing her." Another baby's cry pierced the air. Then another. Nurses scrambled, swaddling each fragile life in blankets torn from storage. Mary, shaking, glanced at the clock. "Doctor, her blood pressure is dropping." The surgeon's jaw tightened. "We're out of O-negative blood." Mary hesitated. "What about the blood bank?" "Empty. The last donation was used an hour ago for a road accident victim." His voice softened. "We're losing her." Back in the ward, Jacob overheard a nurse whisper about the shortage. His head spun. He tried to stand but collapsed back, groaning. His thoughts screamed, "I should be there. I should be holding her hand." As another baby emerged, the room filled with a strange, sacred silence. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. All odds cried into the world. But Grace's breaths were shallow now, her lips pale. Now she had 9 babies from the surgery. Suddenly the lights blinked on. The generator roared back to life. Relief flooded the room, but the doctor's face stayed grim. It might be too late. At that exact moment, Jacob began to sing softly through cracked lips, a song he used to hum to Grace during their hardest nights. His voice was rough, broken, but it carried down the hallway. The sound reached a nurse near the operating room door. She paused, listening. Grace's eyelids fluttered. Somewhere deep in her fading consciousness, she heard him. The surgeon caught the faint pulse on the monitor and leaned closer. "She's fighting. She's actually fighting." Mary gasped. "Doctor, should we?" He cut her off. "Prep the transfusion bag. Even if it's not a full match, we try." As they scrambled to stabilize her, news of the 9 babies spread like wildfire through the hospital. Strangers peeked through the windows of the nursery. Some fell to their knees and prayed. Others simply stared, awestruck. Jacob, exhausted and bleeding internally, whispered to himself, "Please, God, just spare her. Let her see our children." The monitor beside Grace beeped erratically. The surgeon's voice rose above the noise. "We're losing her heartbeat again." And then, just as the first rays of dawn threatened the horizon, the power flickered once more, plunging the room into darkness. The operating room was swallowed by darkness. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. The machines, the doctors, even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Grace's monitor emitted a faint, dying beep. The surgeon's hand froze mid-air. Nurses exchanged terrified glances. Outside, the storm hissed against the windows as if the whole world was watching. Then Mary's trembling voice pierced the silence. "Doctor, her pulse, it's fading." "Don't let her go," the surgeon barked, snapping out of his shock. "Hold those flashlights steady." Two nurses scrambled to their phones, their flashlight beams shaking across Grace's pale, sweat-soaked face. In the ward, Jacob fought against the pain in his ribs, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Every movement felt like knives carving his insides. He didn't care. He staggered to the door, ignoring the nurse yelling, "Sir, stop! You're bleeding!" His bare feet slapped against the cold tile as he limped down the hallway, following the faint sounds of crying babies. Grace floated in a strange, peaceful haze. She saw flashes of her life, her mother braiding her hair as a child, the day Jacob slipped a ring on her finger, the nights she cried herself to sleep praying for a child. Then came the faces of people who had mocked her. Their jeers echoed, barren woman, wasted wife. But through the noise, Jacob's rough, broken singing cut through like sunlight through clouds. She clung to the sound. Inside the OR, the doctor's voice trembled for the first time. "We're losing her. If we don't get blood now." Mary's eyes darted to a cooler in the corner. It held the last 2 pints of mismatched blood. "Doctor, it's not O negative, but..." "Do it," he snapped. "It's our only chance." As the transfusion began, the backup generator coughed, sputtered, and then roared weakly back to life. The lights flickered on just long enough for the surgeon to glimpse Grace's chest rising faintly. "Come on, Grace," he whispered, as if she could hear him. Jacob reached the operating room door, clutching the frame for balance. His bandaged side was soaked with blood. Through the small window, he saw the blur of doctors and the faint outline of Grace. He pressed his forehead against the glass and whispered, "Don't leave me, Grace. Don't leave our babies." A nurse spotted him and ran over. "Sir, you're tearing your stitches." "I don't care," he rasped. "Tell her I'm here. Tell her I'm waiting." Inside, Grace's heartbeat steadied, just barely. But she was far from safe. Hours blurred together. The storm outside subsided, replaced by an eerie calm. The 9 newborns lay in a row of borrowed cribs, their tiny chests rising and falling. Even the most hardened staff stopped to look at them. One whispered, "This is a miracle. 9 lives in 1 night." But the whispers among the onlookers turned cruel outside the door. Some murmured, "She must have done something unnatural." Others said, 9 babies. That's a curse, not a blessing." The hospital's head nurse overheard and snapped, "She is a mother, a hero. Keep your tongues from venom." Her words silenced them, but the doubt lingered. Hours later, Jacob's condition worsened. Internal bleeding was suspected, and the doctor warned, "He needs surgery soon." But Jacob refused until he knew Grace was safe. His voice was weak but firm. "I'm not going under until I see her alive." Grace, semi-conscious now, stirred at the sound of crying babies echoing faintly down the hallway. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Are they ours?" Mary bent close, tears in her eyes. "Yes, Grace. All 9. They're waiting for you." A single tear slid down Grace's cheek. She thought of the years of humiliation, the nights of whispered prayers, and the moment she'd forgiven Jacob. The world might never understand her pain, But for now, she had everything she'd begged for, 9 tiny reasons to fight. But as she tried to speak again, her body convulsed. The monitor screamed. The surgeon cursed under his breath. She's bleeding internally. At the same time, Jacob collapsed in the hallway, his body finally giving out. Nurses rushed to him, shouting for a stretcher. 2 lives, the parents of 9 newborns, were now on the brink. In the nursery, one of the babies began to wail loudly, a sound so piercing it seemed to carry the weight of destiny. A cleaner passing by muttered under her breath, "Something is not right. 2 parents, 9 babies, and this cursed night." The generator sputtered again, threatening another blackout. The surgeon barked orders, his voice rising over the chaos. "We need more hands, more blood, anything." In the distance, a siren wailed, the fuel truck finally arriving. But would it be too late to save Grace and Jacob? The fuel truck's headlights cut through the lingering storm as it screeched to a halt outside the hospital. 2 men jumped out, fumbling with the hose to refill the generator. Inside, the corridors pulsed with panic. The faint buzz of electricity returned just in time. Monitors blinked back to life, casting a cold glow on terrified faces. In the operating room, the surgeon exhaled in relief but didn't slow his hands. "We're not out of danger yet," he muttered, working quickly to control Grace's bleeding. Mary wiped sweat from her brow, her fingers trembling as she passed instruments. The 9 newborns, safe for now, slept under borrowed heating lamps, their tiny breaths a fragile hymn against the chaos. Down the hall, Jacob's stretcher skidded into another surgical room. A young doctor named Daniel examined him, his voice grim. "Internal bleeding confirmed. He needs surgery now." But Jacob grabbed Daniel's sleeve weakly. "Please, just let me see her first." Daniel hesitated, then nodded to a nurse. "Wheel him past the OR fast." As Jacob's stretcher rolled by Grace's door, the nurse pushed it close enough for him to glimpse her pale face through the glass. Her chest rose and fell weakly. Jacob's eyes filled. "Grace," he whispered, "we waited 15 years for this. Don't you dare leave me now." Then his world faded to black as anesthesia claimed him. In the nursery, whispers from visiting relatives and curious onlookers began again. 9 babies. That's too much for one woman to carry. Maybe it's not natural. Another scoffed. Or maybe Jacob's family has strong blood. But one elderly woman shook her head, her voice cracking. "No, this is not about blood. This is about faith, and a woman's strength." Mary, overhearing, felt anger rise in her chest. She turned to the women. "She risked her life for those children. Show some respect." Her voice carried enough steel to silence the room. Hours dragged on. The storm outside finally calmed, leaving a damp, heavy stillness. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and rain. Nurses shuffled between the 2 operating rooms, their faces masks of fatigue and dread. At 4:17 a.m., the generator coughed but held steady. Grace's heartbeat stabilized, faint but present. The surgeon exhaled. "She's holding on for now." In another room, Jacob's surgery was progressing. Daniel worked with quiet determination, repairing torn blood vessels. "This man's been through hell tonight," he murmured. Meanwhile, the news had begun to spread beyond the hospital walls. A midwife had secretly sent a message to her cousin, who posted online. "Woman delivers 9 babies after 15 years barren, both parents fighting for their lives." By dawn, the post had gone viral. Strangers began showing up outside the hospital gates, some praying, some bringing food and blankets for the babies. Grace stirred slightly, drifting in and out of consciousness. In her dreams, she saw Jacob holding 9 tiny hands, smiling the way he had when they first met. But when she tried to reach him, a wall of shadow blocked her path. She woke briefly to the sound of distant crying, the babies, and a whisper in her mind, "Fight." In the recovery room, Jacob woke groggy and weak, pain radiating through his body. A nurse leaned over him. "You made it through, sir. Rest now." His first words. Grace, where is Grace? She's still in critical condition, but she's alive. Jacob closed his eyes, relief flooding him even as tears slipped down his cheeks. Tell her I'll be better. I'll be the father she prayed for. Morning sunlight crept into the hospital, washing the corridors in gold. Outside, a crowd gathered. Women who had once mocked Grace now stood with bowed heads, whispering prayers for her survival. A local radio station sent a reporter to the gate. The city was waking up to the story of the barren woman who had defied nature. But inside, Grace's condition suddenly changed. Her blood pressure plummeted without warning. The surgeon, who had stepped out for a moment, was called back urgently. "We're losing her again," a nurse cried. At the same time, one of the 9 babies, a tiny boy swaddled in blue, began to struggle for breath. His monitor beeped frantically. The pediatrician shouted, "We need oxygen here." But the oxygen supply was low, too low for both mother and child. Mary's eyes darted between the 2 rooms. Grace, the mother who had endured years of pain, and the gasping newborn fighting for his first full breath. She whispered, "God, who do we save first?" The crowd outside the hospital had no idea that inside, the greatest miracle of the night might be on the verge of turning into its greatest heartbreak. The hallway outside Grace's room was silent except for the hum of the generator and the distant cry of a baby. Mary stood frozen for a heartbeat, the oxygen dilemma crushing her chest. The pediatrician barked, "Mary, choose now." Her hands trembled as she grabbed the smaller tank, rushing first toward the newborn. The tiny boy's lips were already turning blue. She slipped the mask over his nose and mouth. His tiny chest fluttered, then rose, then fell again. A faint cry, thin but alive, escaped his lips. The room exhaled in relief, but the monitors in Grace's or screamed louder. Her pulse dipped, her pressure crashed. The surgeon burst back through the door, gloves already on. "What happened?" "She's crashing again," a nurse replied, voice shaking. "Then we fight harder," the surgeon growled. "Start compressions." Across the hall, Jacob, pale and still groggy from surgery, tried to sit up when he heard the commotion. A nurse hurried to stop him. "Sir, you need to rest." "Don't tell me to rest," Jacob rasped, his voice breaking. "That's my wife in there. She's been fighting for 15 years. I'm not lying here while she dies." His chest heaved painfully as he struggled to his feet, ignoring the blood seeping through his bandages. Supported by 2 nurses, he staggered to the operating room window and pressed his trembling hand against the glass. His lips moved in silent prayer, every muscle screaming in agony. Inside, the surgeon's hands worked feverishly. Sweat dripped onto the table. "We need more blood," he shouted. But the supply was gone. Mary rushed in, her face pale. "Doctor, there's nothing left." The surgeon froze for a heartbeat, then nodded grimly. "Then we keep her alive without it. Manual pressure. Fluids. Anything." A nurse whispered, "She's slipping away." Jacob could hear fragments of their frantic voices through the door. The hallway swam before his eyes, but he focused on one memory. Grace laughing on their wedding night, her head thrown back, her joy lighting up the room. He pressed his forehead to the glass. "Grace, don't leave me. Not now. Not after everything." Minutes felt like hours. The baby's faint cries drifted from the nursery, 9 tiny voices reminding everyone what was at stake. The cleaner who had earlier called the night cursed now stood outside the nursery, whispering prayers under her breath. Even the skeptical visitors had fallen silent, their mocking replaced by awe. Then the monitor gave a single steady beep. Another. Grace's chest rose weakly. A sigh of relief swept the room. "She's stable for now," the surgeon said, voice ragged with exhaustion. But even as they breathed out, a fresh crisis stirred. One of the heating lamps over the newborns flickered and died. The babies needed warmth, but the backup equipment was scarce. Nurses scrambled, wrapping the infants in extra blankets, using body heat to keep them alive. The hospital administrator arrived, his face drawn. "The government is on the way with more supplies," he announced. "The story's gone viral. People are sending donations." But his words felt distant compared to the fragile rise and fall of Grace's chest. Later that morning, Jacob was finally allowed into Grace's room. His steps were slow, each one sending pain through his stitched abdomen. He sat beside her bed, took her cold hand in his and whispered, "We did it, Grace. They're here. 9 beautiful miracles. But you can't leave me alone with them. You promised me forever." Grace stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Her lips parted slightly. "Jacob," she breathed, so faint he had to lean close to hear. "Take care of them." His throat tightened. "No, Grace. Don't talk like that. You're going to get better. We're going to raise them together." Her weak smile flickered, then faded. Machines beeped softly. Outside the room, the hallway filled with well-wishers, neighbors, nurses, even women who had once mocked her. They peeked in, some crying quietly. As afternoon light spilled through the windows, a journalist arrived with a camera crew. The babies were filmed, bundled together, their tiny faces a testament to perseverance. The reporter's voice cracked as she said into the camera, "This is the story of a woman who fought for 15 years for a miracle, and a man who refused to stop believing." But as dusk approached, Grace's condition suddenly worsened. Her breathing became shallow, her lips pale once more. The surgeon, summoned again, assessed her quickly. "She's bleeding internally again. We can try another procedure. But her body might not survive it." Jacob clutched her hand tighter. "No, save her. Please." The doctor's eyes were kind but heavy. "We will try. But you must prepare yourself." As Grace was wheeled back toward surgery, Jacob's knees buckled. A nurse caught him before he fell. The hallway was filled with sobs. The same women who once mocked Grace now wept openly, whispering prayers. Then, as the doors swung shut, a nurse rushed out of the nursery. "One of the babies isn't breathing," she cried. The corridor froze. 2 lives, mother and child, teetered on the edge. The hospital's generator gave another ominous sputter, threatening another blackout. The generator's sputter echoed through the hospital like a death rattle. Nurses scrambled, shouting for flashlights. The faint beeping of machines slowed to an unbearable rhythm, reminding everyone how fragile life had become. Mary clutched the lifeless newborn to her chest, her tears falling on the baby's tiny face as she rushed toward the emergency table. In the operating room, the surgeon's voice cut through the chaos. "We're losing her again, more suction now." Grace's body looked impossibly small on the table beneath the harsh light. Her skin was pale, her lips dry and cracked. Every cut, every stitch the doctors had made felt like a betrayal of her fragile strength, yet they had no choice but to keep going. Jacob, weak from his own surgery, pulled himself upright in his bed. The pain was excruciating, but the sound of the nurse's cry, "One of the babies isn't breathing," was worse. He staggered toward the nursery door, gripping the wall for balance. His vision blurred. He whispered to himself, "God, don't take them both, please." Mary placed the newborn on the resuscitation table. "Come on, little one," she begged, pressing her fingers to his tiny chest. Another nurse brought an oxygen mask, but the generator flickered again. The oxygen machine hesitated before delivering a weak hiss of air. The room fell into an agonizing silence, every adult holding their breath as the baby's chest remained still. Then faintly a gasp, the tiniest, most fragile sound. The baby's chest rose, then again. Mary let out a sob of relief, her hands shaking. "He's breathing." But the relief was short-lived. The surgeon's exhausted voice carried from the OR. "We've stabilized her bleeding, but her heart is too weak. Prepare the defibrillator." The power blinked out again. The machine beeped once, then died. Mary burst into the room with a manual resuscitation kit. "Doctor," she cried. The surgeon's hands moved with urgent precision, pumping Grace's chest. "Stay with us, Grace. You fought for 15 years. You're not leaving now." Meanwhile, outside the hospital, a crowd had gathered. Women who had once mocked Grace now held hands in prayer circles. Men knelt on the wet ground, whispering pleas to the heavens. Cars lined the street, their headlights casting a vigil glow against the cracked hospital walls. Inside, Jacob forced his way to the window. He pressed his bloodied palm to the glass, whispering words only Grace could hear in her heart. "Remember the day we danced under the rain, Grace? Remember how we promised to grow old together? Please, don't make me raise them alone." Grace's mind floated again, this time to a quiet memory. A younger Jacob standing in a field of sunlit grass, holding her hand, promising, "No matter what they say, I'll wait with you." She wanted to reach him now, but her body felt like stone. The surgeon's voice wavered. "Her heartbeat is fading." The crowd outside erupted into song, soft, trembling voices rising through the night. A mother's lullaby. A father's prayer. It filled the hospital halls like a living force. Mary's hands trembled as she whispered, "She can hear us, she has to." But Grace's body remained still. Her heart monitor gave one long final beep. The surgeon froze. The nurses gasped. Mary covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Jacob collapsed against the glass, his world shattering in a single soundless moment. The lullabies outside turned into cries of anguish. Women wailed. Men covered their faces. 9 tiny cries echoed from the nursery, the sound of life born from loss. The hospital administrator stepped into the corridor, his voice breaking. "She's gone." Jacob slid down the wall, his body shaking. He buried his face in his hands, whispering broken promises. "I'll raise them, Grace. I'll tell them about you every day. I'll make them proud of the woman who gave them life." Word spread quickly. By dawn, reporters filled the hospital gates. Government officials called, promising aid. Donations flooded in. Medical equipment, food, money. Dignitaries arrived, offering condolences and pledging to honor Grace's sacrifice. Later that week, Grace's funeral became a national event. Women who had once judged her now carried flowers to her grave. Men who had whispered cruel words wiped tears from their cheeks. 9 babies, swaddled in white, were carried into the ceremony, their tiny breaths a testament to her love and endurance. Jacob stood before the crowd, his bandages hidden beneath a clean shirt, his voice trembling. She was mocked, she was doubted, but she never gave up. She carried 9 lives inside her and gave everything for them. To every woman who has been shamed for what she cannot control, to every man who has forgotten to stand beside her, remember Grace. The crowd wept openly. The nation mourned. Hospitals began campaigns to improve maternal care. Families whispered new respect for mothers. Grace, once ridiculed, had become a heroine, a symbol of strength that would outlive her name. As the sun set, Jacob cradled one of the babies against his chest and looked toward the horizon. His voice was barely a whisper, but the words were a vow carved into the evening sky. "Your mother was a warrior. I will raise you all to know her love." The cries of the 9 babies rose together, a fragile chorus, but one filled with hope, reminding everyone present that even in the face of unbearable loss, life had triumphed. The sun climbed lazily over the city, casting a warm golden haze on the hospital's courtyard, where 9 bassinets lined the veranda like delicate pearls on display. The nation's grief had softened overnight into a determined tenderness. People from all walks of life had come with gifts, songs, and whispered prayers for the motherless children. Jacob sat on a wooden bench under the shade of an old almond tree, his face gaunt but resolute. His bandages were still fresh, but he cradled the eldest of the 9, tiny Esther, in his arms. She opened her small eyes briefly, as if to search for her mother. The ache that gripped his chest felt unbearable. Mary approached quietly, her steps cautious, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "They're safe for now. The donations, the volunteers, even the governor called again. They want to set up a trust fund." Jacob didn't look up. No fund can replace her. His voice cracked like glass under pressure. Do you know what she said to me the night before she went into labor? She said, "If anything happens, promise you'll tell them who I was. Don't let anyone rewrite my story." Mary's eyes shone with tears. "Then that's what you'll do. And you won't do it alone." The babies stirred, their cries soft and uneven, reminders of 9 hungry mouths and 9 futures that needed shaping. Nurses came with warm bottles, and volunteers sang lullabies that wrapped the courtyard in a strange, bittersweet calm. Days turned into weeks. The funeral flowers wilted, the headlines faded, and the city's frenzy quieted. But inside Jacob's small home, the echoes of Grace's sacrifice lived on. Diapers hung like white flags on the line. Formula cans lined the shelves where books once stood. Every corner carried a whisper of her. Her favorite shawl on the chair, her scent lingering faintly on the children's blankets. At night, Jacob would sit on the floor with the babies arranged around him like a fragile constellation. He told them stories. How Grace once chased a runaway goat across the marketplace in her Sunday shoes. How she would hum lullabies even when there was no baby to soothe. How she believed in miracles even when the world mocked her. Sometimes his voice broke. Sometimes he stopped mid-sentence, staring at the empty space where she should have been. But the babies, too young to understand, responded with coos and sleepy sighs, as if assuring him they were listening. The community stepped in. Neighbors took turns watching the children. Strangers arrived with clothes and formula. A women's group offered to rotate cooking and laundry. Even the same elders who had once shunned Grace now came with bowed heads, seeking forgiveness through their service. But not everyone was kind. One afternoon, Jacob overheard a pair of men at the marketplace whispering, "It's too much for him. 9 mouths. He'll break. Maybe he should give some away." Jacob clenched his fists, the anger bubbling beneath his grief. That night, standing over the bassinets, he whispered fiercely, "No one is taking you. You're her legacy. You're my promise." Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Jacob carried all 9 babies, one by one, into the small church where he and Grace had once prayed for a child. The congregation fell silent as the row of bassinets filled the aisle. Jacob stepped to the altar, his voice steady but soft. "These are Grace's children," he said. "She didn't live to see them grow, but she believed they would change the world. I don't know how to raise 9 on my own, but I know this. I will love them with everything I have. And I will raise them to know her courage." The pastor placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder. "You're not alone," he said, and the entire church stood, one by one, pledging support. As the choir began to sing, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, spilling color onto the 9 tiny faces. Jacob felt, for the first time since Grace's death, a flicker of something other than pain. It was fragile but unmistakable. It was hope. The babies stirred again, their small voices weaving into the hymn, as if Grace herself were singing through them. Jacob closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, and whispered into the air, "I'll keep your story alive, Grace. I swear it." Outside, the almond tree swayed gently in the breeze, a silent witness to a new chapter, one not of loss alone, but of a future Grace had given everything to create. A gentle rain tapped on the corrugated roof of Jacob's home, its rhythm steady and soothing, unlike the chaos that often filled the small house now alive with 9 tiny personalities. 3 years had passed since Grace's passing, and though the ache in Jacob's chest had never truly vanished, it had softened into something bittersweet, something that felt like love wearing the clothes of memory. The children had begun to reveal themselves as unique sparks of Grace's spirit. Esther, the eldest, had her mother's quiet determination. David, the second-born, was bold and curious, always tugging at Jacob's shirt for answers. Hannah and Ruth, identical twins, were inseparable troublemakers, sneaking extra biscuits and giggling as they hid beneath the table. Peter, John, and little Matthew shared an unspoken brotherly bond, while Sarah and Naomi, the smallest of the group, clung to Jacob's legs whenever he left the room. Jacob's mornings began before sunrise. feeding, changing, soothing, and singing lullabies Grace had once hummed to a child they never thought would come. Sometimes, when the children laughed together, the sound was so full and bright it felt as if Grace herself had stepped into the room, her presence lingering like sunlight on a cold morning. The community's support had blossomed into something enduring. Neighbors rotated visits. The church had raised funds to build a small extension to Jacob's home so the children would each have a little space of their own. A women's group, now named the Grace Foundation, began offering medical aid and counseling to struggling mothers in the city, an idea born from the story of the woman whose swollen belly had once been mocked, but whose sacrifice had transformed a community. One evening, Jacob sat on the porch, the almond tree swaying gently overhead. Mary joined him, bringing 2 cups of tea. The sky burned orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. The laughter of the 9 filled the air behind them. "They'll grow up strong," Mary said softly. "They'll grow up knowing who she was," Jacob replied, staring into the sky. "Every single one of them will know their mother's name and what she stood for." Mary placed a hand over his. "She'd be proud of you, Jacob. More than you know." As the years rolled on, the story of Grace's sacrifice continued to ripple outward. Her name became a symbol in hospitals and churches across the region, a reminder that motherhood's worth could never be measured by the timing of a child's arrival or the whispers of a judgmental crowd. Mothers who once suffered in silence now spoke openly about their struggles, demanding better health care, better support, and better compassion. On the 9th anniversary of the children's birth, the city unveiled a plaque outside the hospital, in memory of Grace, whose love and courage gave life to 9. Jacob stood there with his children, now tall and curious, their eyes bright like their mother's. Esther reached for his hand. "Dad," she asked softly, "was she scared?" Jacob knelt, pulling her close. "She was brave," he said, his voice steady. "She believed in you before she even knew your names. She gave everything so you could be here today." The children gathered around, forming a circle. Together they stood quietly, the weight of her story settling into their young hearts. A gentle breeze swept through the courtyard, rustling the leaves of the almond tree nearby, the same kind of breeze that had danced outside the hospital on the day Grace gave her life. That night, Jacob sat on the porch again, the stars spilling across the sky. He whispered into the darkness as he had so many times before. "I kept my promise, Grace. They know you. They'll always know you." Behind him, 9 small voices broke into a song they'd learned from the women's group, a lullaby Grace once sang to a child she hadn't yet met. Their voices carried into the night, soft but strong, echoing across the city and beyond. Grace, once ridiculed and abandoned by whispers, had become a heroine whose story reshaped hearts and futures. Through the laughter of 9 children, through Jacob's steadfast love, and through a community transformed by empathy, her legacy lived on. And as the almond tree swayed under the starlit sky, the city remembered. Sometimes the greatest miracles are born not from ease, but from pain, sacrifice, and a love so deep it refuses to fade.